Hello, everybody. It's a pleasure again to be here again with you guys, and we're very excited today to have Mary Foy with us. She's the Director of Technical Services for Proxy-Clean, and besides that, I think that Mary has done a lot of research in the University of Arkansas. Maybe she doesn't like what I'm going to say, but she's an authority in the water treatment and research, and we're very pleased and glad to have her here today. So, as always, the presentation is going to be around 45 minutes. Then we're going to have a space for questions. And then, like always, this presentation is going to be open for open view in our YouTube channel in maybe 1 week. So, Mary, thank you very much for your time, and the time is yours. I think you have your mic off.
All right. Thank you so much.
There we go. Thank you, Mary. Go ahead.
Thank you for the nice introduction. Let me see. I may have the wrong screen on. Give me just a second here. I'm so sorry. I know we practiced this before. Hang on just a second. Okay, I believe we're up and going now. All right, so thank you so much for joining us today. My plan today is to just talk about the basics of a water program. And I could go on for hours about what we find in the water and the water treatments that we use, and all of the problems that I've seen in water lines and water programs. But today, I think we're just going to start with some of the basics because I find that just getting started on a water program seems to sometimes be overwhelming for some people. And I'm hoping that this will help simplify it so it doesn't seem like something that's so scary. So, of course, when we talk about implementing any kind of program, it always boils down to how is it going to benefit us on the bottom line? And water could be impacting that bottom line, i.e. bird performance, through the bird health and through your drinker line functionality. A lot of times these go hand in hand, since whatever builds up in that water line and in those drinkers, which is going to be minerals and living organisms, that can have an impact on bird health. So let's talk about that just a little bit here. We're going to be talking about what it is that you find in the water. What is my problem with the water? What is the potential issue that I could have? And those two potential issues are really just boiled down to two different things. You can have minerals in there, or you could have living organisms in there. And those are the two that you want to find as much information as possible out about your water source. So I tell people, if you don't know anything about your water, get to know it a little bit. Everybody's water is different depending on your source and depending what you add to it. And so getting to know that water source can be very helpful in how you're going to set up a water program for your complex or for your farm in particular. So a good place to start is mineral testing. Mineral testing is very easy. It does not require a sterile sample. It does not require refrigeration. You can put it in just a regular water bottle and just mail it to a lab that will do mineral testing for you. And it's usually very inexpensive. So it's a great first step. If you don't already have information on that water source, getting a mineral test done is a great first step. You could also do bacteria testing. Bacteria testing, even though I'm a microbiologist and I love to know what's happening in that water line, it's not always the place to start. It requires sterile sampling techniques. Which means that you've got to have a sterile container to start with. And to be honest, that's kind of hard to come by. You got to keep it refrigerated at all times. It's got to be at the lab within 48 hours, and it can get really pricey. So what I usually do is I tell people that if you have not, if you have not done some cleaning or some waterline treatment, just start doing that. And then later on, if you know that you've got some health issues, then do the bacteria testing. But start with that mineral test first. Great place to start. So why do you even care if there's minerals in that water line? What role can those minerals be playing in the performance of your birds? Well, it can have a negative impact on bird health. Besides the impact that it'll have on bird health, minerals are a great source of food for organisms in the water. I don't know that everyone knows that there are bacteria that can live on nothing else but the minerals that you've got in that water system. And then those minerals can build up as scale, mineral scale in the water lines. It causes your equipment to function inefficiently. And that scale, once it's attached to that water line, is a great place for organisms to hide from your water treatment. So you can have that scale built up in there, and then you've got organisms making your birds sick. So what do these minerals do? When you get some mineral results back, it might be good to dig in to where you have some higher mineral levels. This is just an example. There's all kinds of minerals. The lab that we use tests for, I don't know, 26 or 28 different kinds of minerals. But these are some of the more common ones that we come across on poultry farms. Sulfur, that is a great food source for bacteria, and it changes the taste of the water. You know, sulfur a lot of times has that rotten egg smell. That's how we know it's sulfur. Well, that rotten egg smell is actually from the breakdown of sulfur and the byproduct that the organisms are producing as they break it down. So if you're smelling that rotten egg smell, then not only do you have sulfur issues, but you've got bacteria issues also. Zinc is one of them. It changes the taste of the water. It causes the water to taste astringent. And so the birds will decrease their water consumption. And you really won't know why, because zinc is clear. Unless you've had a mineral test done, you won't know there's zinc in that water. And that may be why the birds are not drinking as much as they usually do. Magnesium is another one that causes birds to flush or to have diarrhea. If you think about that, you know, milk of magnesia, what's that do for us? It's going to do the same things for the birds. Nitrates. Nitrates are something that can occur naturally in your water source, or it can be a result of a lot of bacteria in the system that are producing gases and breaking organics down to produce those nitrates. And long-term exposure to that damages the neurosystem. Sodium and chloride, we know that's salt. We know that that's not a great thing for poultry to have. And then iron. Iron promotes the growth of bacteria. E. coli is especially one of them that loves iron as a food source. So, and iron is one of the most common ones that we come across when you're dealing with a source such as a well or surface water pulling in. So great way, know what those challenges are, get some mineral tests done. As we're talking about iron, before we leave the subject of iron, iron is one of those that's kind of got a double edge to it, and we run into it all the time. Iron tastes a little bitter, and it's a lot of iron is not necessarily bad for the bird's health, but that bitter taste is going to cause them to back off drinking water a little bit. And then iron is a great source of food, like I said, for all kinds of bacteria. E. coli is notorious for it, but there are all kinds of bacteria that live on it as a food source. And so it's that bacteria that's living on it that can really become detrimental to the health of your birds for it. They produce a lot of slime when they live on iron, and this clogs up the filters, and it clogs up your pressure reducers, and it clogs up your regulators, and it clogs up your drinkers, and then it helps hide pathogens in there as well, even pathogens that aren't necessarily living on the iron. This slime helps hide those pathogens. So I tell people, if you want to know, if you got an iron issue and you want to know that you've got some iron bacteria living in there or not, a great way to find out is to just go in the ante room, pull up the filter, run your finger along that filter, and if it's slimy, you've got some kind of organism living off of that iron in there. The mineral by itself will not be slimy. So if it's slimy, there's some kind of organic process happening from a living organism. So iron and sulfur, like we've kind of discussed, they both support bacteria that thrive as the water gets warmer. And the less disturbed these environments are, the more established that growth can become. So that slow water that moves in the water line, sometimes it allows for more bacterial growth. And if you think about when is our water in the poultry house moving the slowest, and when does it get the warmest? Well, that's when those babies are in there. That's when we've put those chicks in there and we've warmed that water up, and they're very slow at drinking the water. Sometimes it can take a couple of days before they ever turn over the complete capacity of that water system. So they're getting drinks and they're hitting those drinkers over and over again, and they're just re-inoculating stuff back into that water line. And then it's slow and it's warm. Great time for bacteria to grow. And so a lot of times if we've got some production issues, that 7-day mortality is not looking good, or they're not putting the weight on like they should, a lot of times that is due to the water system not being clean. And so they have hit this challenge of a lot of buildup in that water system in that first week. I'm just going to hit these quickly. These are some other mineral issues that you might run across. Another reason to get some mineral tests done. Manganese, it's black and grainy and kind of flaky. It shows up on those filters in the anteroom. Lead, I don't run into that a whole lot anymore. When I first started this, which I hate to say how old I am, but back in the day when I first started this, I ran into this a little more often. Lead can leach out of our water system due to the solder on copper pipes, or those underground lead pipes. If those have not been changed out, and especially when it gets warm, lead leaches out of those. Turbidity, just simple turbidity can be a problem, because particles in the water are also tying up the chemistry that you're trying to use to treat that water. And then hardness becomes a problem, because that's a combination of calcium and magnesium, and it starts to build on your water lines. And because of that scale that's building there, like I said before, you get bacteria that live in that scale, and it hides from your water treatment. We do have agricultural limits on these minerals. And if you're interested in what those limits are, because it's kind of hard to find online. A lot of times if we Google something online, it's for human consumption. Well, our agricultural limits are a little bit different. And if you have trouble finding that, you're welcome to contact me. I can share this chart with you. I also have a chart from the University of Arkansas that had put together what some of the simple solutions are. If you've reached those maximum levels of some of those minerals, there are solutions to it, and we've tried to put that together for you. So what can you do about it? Okay, I got minerals. Now what do I do? It depends on what the minerals are, and sometimes it's a combination of the minerals that can be presenting you with a challenge. There's a couple of things you can do. The most common thing to do is to do some kind of chemical treatment, which is going to be some kind of oxidizer, such as a hydrogen peroxide or a chlorine or ozone. That oxidizer helps with that, making the mineral a little bit of a larger particle. And then that mineral will be caught on filtration. And so you may just need to step up your filtration, your oxidizing chemicals, and then filtration. Great place to start to try to remove minerals from the water. So this is my thing. I mean, I love bacteria testing, and I'd love to see what's in everybody's water lines, but that gets expensive, and it's not always accurate because of the way the samples are handled in transport. And so I'm just one of those that if you haven't been cleaning the water lines, and if you haven't been treating the water, then you have bacteria in the water lines. So just assume it's there. If you've not been on top of your water treatment, just assume they're there, and just start there. Start cleaning lines and treating water, and then move on to that. So I have people ask all the time, my water is good. My water is good at the house. I'm actually getting city water, so that's not a problem. How am I still getting living organisms in my water lines? Well, here's a couple of ways. You can get it from the source. So if you're pulling from a well, if you're doing surface water, even spring water coming down out of the mountains, it can have all kinds of living organisms in it. You could have cracks in your underground lines on your property, and things driving across it can crack those underground lines. Your ventilation system pulls it into the poultry house. It could be coming from the injector or the solution bucket that you're using, you're injecting stuff with a medicator. It could be coming from that, or it could simply be coming because you've got 1,000 birds over and over and over drinking from hundreds of drinkers. And every time they hit that drinker, they are leaving something on that drinker that can grow in that line. So if you're getting bacteria from the source, I know that most of the farms I work with have well water. You can get seepage from the surface. It depends on how deep that well is. I've worked with some who their well is 75 feet deep. And so what happens on the surface has a huge impact on that well. Some of them they're 700 feet deep. And so what happens on the surface has no impact whatsoever. If you've worked on the well recently, if you've had to pull that pump out and lay it on the ground, and you're in a cow pasture and you lay it on a ground with cow poo around, then you're going to wind up with some E. coli on that equipment. So you got to clean that equipment before it goes back in the well, or you could wind up with an E. coli issue in your well, things like that. Flooding, of course, again, kind of that seepage from the surface thing, disturbance from neighboring lands. So I am in Texas, and those oil wells will mess up the water table. So being in tune with what's happening in the area around you can be helpful. Or a cracked or damaged well. Of course, letting in water from a source that is not your actual aquifer. Now, I have a lot of people say, well, I've got municipal water, I have city water, so I don't have to worry about it. But we do have issues with city water too. You can have a crack in an underground line. Once it gets on your property, the city's not responsible for it anymore. So you could have some issues happening on your property with your underground lines. A long distance from where that water was originally treated can allow bacteria to grow from the farm itself backwards in the line into your filters and back up into your underground lines. Or a failure of treatment allows bacteria to survive and grow in the poultry house itself. So a lot of times this municipal water, by the time it gets to the farm, it doesn't have that chlorine in it anymore, or whatever it is that they've treated the water with, because it has come such a long distance. And so you've got untreated water in that poultry house. And again, there's those birds adding stuff back to the system, and you don't have any kind of oxidizer in that system to fight what the birds are adding back. Cracks in those underground lines and in any kind of issues in the storage tanks. If you sometimes we drive onto a farm and there's constantly this little puddle there on the driveway, and we don't really think about it because we get so used to it. But that is a sign that perhaps you've got some underground lines leaking. So if you've got a constant little puddle somewhere, a little muddy spot in that driveway, good thing to check those underground lines and make sure it's not coming from that. If there have been previous repairs that may have failed, frost line's probably not going to be a problem for a lot of you. How old is that storage tank? I've come across cisterns that have been in the ground for 60, 70 years. There's cement cisterns under there, and they've got a lot of stuff built up in them that's contributing to the water quality issues. And think about those underground lines. So even if they're not cracked, there is stuff built in those underground lines all the time. When was the last time those were cleaned? Have they ever been cleaned? So that might be something to consider when you've got some water issues and you're trying to set up the best water program you can. Don't forget about the underground lines. And then we get bacteria from injectors and our own solution buckets, our medicator buckets. So what are you adding to it? We add vitamins and electrolytes and vinegar and citric acid and beer. And yes, I honest to goodness have had a group add beer to their water lines to try to help the 7-day 7-day mortality and 7-day waits. It was a mess, absolute mess in those water lines. So whatever you're adding to it, keep in mind that if it's helping those birds grow better, if it is providing a health benefit to those birds, it's providing a health benefit to whatever organisms are in those water lines. And that has become a huge issue in the last 6-7 years, just because removing those antibiotics from the system has really increased all of these additives that we are all trying to put into these water lines. And waterline issues, I think, are becoming a bigger problem because of that. Cover those containers. Man, those containers, if you leave those open and you've got a medicator that's pulling directly from it, if you see in that upper left-hand corner, oh, that's flies. That's a vitamin solution that's going into the water lines. The medicators, you can see the hoses pulling directly out of that tub, and that's dead flies in there. So that's going right into the water line. That's going to set you up for some real issues. So if you do supplements through the medicator, just be sure that you're covering those buckets and those containers. Here on the ventilation side of things, I mentioned that if it can get pulled into the house, it winds up in the water line. Both of these farms that we worked on, they just had different things that got pulled in through the ventilation system. And if it winds up on that water, if it winds up in that house, it is going to wind up in that water line. It lands on those drinkers. There's a lot of things that can move on its own. Like E. coli, for example, has got a flagella on it, which is a little tail. And it can move in that system on its own. And so it'll get up in that drinker system, and it may take some friends with it. It may take yeast with it or algae with it as it moves into that system, and it moves into that water line and can grow readily in that water line just because it got pulled in through the ventilation system. And once you get growth in that water line, you kind of lose control of it. Like I said, because they can move, it can work its way backwards against the flow of water through the system. And you won't believe that it can get back there to the filter in the anteroom, but it can. This is a picture, an example of one of those cases where the growth actually started in the house, the poultry house. They didn't treat it or clean it out, and it just continued to grow, and it moved backwards into the anteroom and into the filter in the anteroom. Pardon. And then, of course, you get bacteria from the birds and the drinkers themselves. So whatever's waiting in that line is a great environment in that water line for bacteria and yeast and molds and fungus and algae, all of those to grow in that water line because it's a great environment. And then the birds keep adding stuff back to it. So every time they get a drink, they've been pecking on the litter, they've been pecking in the feed, they've been pecking on each other, and they've got all kinds of things. And then they take that drink and they leave it on the drinker itself. And that works its way into the system as well. So when we talk about starting a water program, I like to think about, over the years, I've thought, what makes the difference between a water program that succeeds versus a water program that fails? And what I have found is that poultry complexes that take the time to educate everyone that's involved. And yeah, it takes some time, it takes some effort, but I have learned that once they understand what can go wrong, they're a lot more on board. They take ownership of it, and they know that they've got the tools now that they can do something about the water system. Also, leaders that discuss the choices openly, and I mean leaders that can just be the farm owner that wants to discuss it, wants to investigate and find out what his choices are. Groups that implement a company-wide program, they are usually more successful because everybody's doing it, and so everybody gets to talk about it and compare notes. And then owners and management that plan ahead and budget for the program. I don't know why people think that water quality should just be free. And then we add all this other stuff to it, and we contaminate it with all this other stuff. And then they're shocked that they've got to spend some money on it. But to have a plan in mind and budget for it, for the program, just means it's going to be successful. We budget for feed, we budget for litter, we budget for heat, and we budget for lighting. You need to set a budget up for water too, and just plan on it being part of growing an animal. So now what? We've talked about the importance of why we want to do this and a little bit of the basics of what can be in there with minerals and bacteria. So now let's create a water program that we can actually implement. It should include your water program, and it's really very basic. We try to make this so hard, and it doesn't have to be that hard. It's two things. You want to have a method and a frequency for cleaning between the flocks. So when the facility is empty, we're going to clean. And then have some kind of daily water treatment program that you can turn to, that you can rely on for when you actually have animals in the facility. So let's talk about both of those and make them not so scary. Next steps, I would think, would be to get a written plan that everyone can follow. Next time the barn is empty, clean the water lines. Decide on a regular water treatment program while animals are in the facility. Determine if you need that extra filtration. So you do those mineral tests. Do I need to step up my filtration to keep minerals out of the system? If you do have water storage tanks, those need to be cleaned out once a year. And I have a step-by-step. I could go into that too. We don't really have time here today, but we've got a step-by-step program on how you can clean those water storage tanks, because that can seem a little overwhelming sometimes. And train people. Just show them how. So the most basic water program should include cleaning the water lines when the facility is empty. And that's where that train people comes in. I'm going to go step by step on how to clean water lines here. And I'm doing this because I never had a class in how to clean water lines. I mean, this is one of those things that you learn hands-on while you're standing in the facility trying to get gunk out of those water lines. And so having a way to train people to do this is really helpful. So we're going to start with the empty barn, of course. So this is going to be cleaning lines when the animals are gone. So lower those water lines so you can work on them easier, because you're going to be handling these drinkers a little bit. Turn the regulators to the flush system if you've got that. And then I start out by just giving the lines a good freshwater flush. I'm just getting the biggest gunk out of there and junk out of there at first. And I let that flush for maybe, I don't know, 10 or 15 minutes, just trying to get gunk out of there. And this facility happened to have drain lines that went outside the barn itself. But if you don't have those drain lines plumbed to the outside, just put a bucket or a big barrel at the end of those lines to catch what you're going to be flushing out of those water lines. Now here's a little trick. So most of the cleaners that we use, most of the water line cleaners we use, call for a 2% or a 3% solution. And we are really dependent on that medicator. And I know that the majority of people just use a medicator to get a cleaning solution into those water lines. Well, the medicator is a 1 to 128 ratio. And so that is only 0.78% of a solution that you're getting into that water line. And then most of these cleaners call for a 2 or 3% solution. So what we do is we use a little proportioner pump. And there's several of them out there. Our company has one too, but they are not medicators. You use them separately. You unscrew the hoses of the medicator, and you screw these little guys into the system. It works just like the medicator, but it's going to pull that 2% or 3% solution for you into the water line. So you're taking the time to do this. You might as well get the right percentage in there. So once you've hooked in that little proportioner pump, you turn the valves so water's flowing through the proportioner pump, and it's going to flow through just like it would have for your medicator. It's just pulling a bigger percentage for you. You drop the intake tube into the product, and then turn the valves so that the water is flowing through the proportioner pump, and you're going to start flushing that product into the lines. And you go to the end of the line and you just start waiting for that product to come through. Some products are colored. You can put dye in some of these products so you can see when it comes through. If it's a hydrogen peroxide product, it's going to bubble on the ground, like hydrogen peroxide does. And so just be at the end of the line watching that come through to the end. If you don't have one of those proportioner pumps, you can use a sump pump in a barrel. That's how I started doing this. I would just get a big barrel, and I was always looking for a 3% cleaning solution. And so I would fill that barrel. I'd put my 1 gallon of product in there, and then I would fill that barrel with 30 gallons of water, and that's my 3% solution. Just dropped a sump pump in there, and then the hose that came out of the sump pump, I put it directly into the system. I don't know if you can tell in that picture on the right a little bit, I have skipped the medicator. I'm not using that medicator. My hose is going directly into the water system, and that goes quick. You can fill up some lines in 5 or 6 minutes, and you've got lines full. So that's a good way to do it too. So here's the step that most people try to get away with not doing. You have got to trigger those drinkers. If you see a cross section of one of those drinkers, it's got all kinds of stuff in it. It's got little springs in it, and it's got crooks and crannies all in it. Great places for bacteria and yeast and molds and fungus. All that stuff will hide in there. And if you don't get cleaning solution down in there, you're not cleaning it out. It's all just waiting there. It's got that little seal at the top of it that's open and close, open and close. And if you don't trigger it, it's waiting in that drinker well for when your animals come back in and get their first drink. So you got to go through and trigger those drinkers to make sure you're getting product down into those drinker wells. It is the step most people skip because it takes a while, and I know it takes a while. If you're really going to clean this system, that is the way to do it. Go through and trigger those drinkers while product is going in. So allow the product to sit the recommended amount of time. Read those labels. Those labels are on there for a reason. Different products call for different times, and they can range from 6 hours to 24 hours, depending on how harsh they are on the equipment. So be sure you're reading labels of your cleaning products. Once the product sits the recommended amount of time, you're going to flush those lines with fresh water, and then you got to go through and trigger those drinkers again, because you want fresh water in those drinkers when the birds come in. And now you're ready to shut off the valves on your water lines, and now you can put your medicator back on the system. So there's the proper steps for cleaning the water lines. There's a video for it too. I can help you find that video on my company's website. It's the only video that I've ever seen that shows how to clean water lines, but it's a great teaching tool for those that for anybody that's working on the farm with you, or the complex, or the techs that are working with you to learn how to clean those water lines. So here's my pet peeve is acids. So this is a group where acids were used regularly. They did not trigger the drinkers, and the mold growth was due to the continuous use of those acids. And then they kept having bird health problems, bird health issues. And so they finally got into those drinkers, and they found out that there was a lot of growth, mold growth in those drinkers due to the use of the acid products. And then they didn't trigger the drinkers when they were cleaning the water lines. That's a turkey facility, by the way, turkey drinker. And then we got the mineral scale issue. So you've all seen how mineral scale can impact our drinkers. These are a couple of drinker pins with a lot of iron buildup on them. After we have cleaned the water lines, we can descale this stuff out of there. Here's just a few more examples of where we've had mineral buildup in the water system. I always tell people, check that brass regulator, that picture second from the right. That's a little brass regulator, and there's a screen in there. And so if you've got mineral issues, that screen may be covered with stuff, covered with some mineral buildup, and you can clean that out and remove it to keep it from reducing pressure in your water line. So if minerals have been an issue after you've cleaned the gunk out of those water lines, then you can descale the water lines. You can remove that mineral scale. So come right behind your water line cleaner with an equipment-friendly acid, such as a phosphoric-based acid or something, and get your goal down. Your goal is a pH of 4 to 5 in that water line, and let that sit for 24 hours. And then that is going to dissolve the mineral scale out of your water system. And then you're going to flush the lines with fresh water and trigger those drinkers. Here's just an example of how you can improve your drinker performance if you just descale. All right, so let's go into some daily water treatment choices. This is not as complicated as we want to make it sound like it is a lot of times. I'm just going to hit the most common ones and some of the pluses and minuses of them in case you do decide that you want to do some daily water treatment choices. And so this would be after you've cleaned and you've got animals present back in the facility, back in the houses, what you're going to treat the water with every day. So liquid chlorine is probably one of the most common I come across, and it's because it doesn't cost a whole lot, and it's easy to get liquid chlorine. It is most effective when the pH is below a 6. So a lot of times when you're using liquid chlorine, you also have to have a second injector that is injecting an acid product to get that pH below 6. It's readily used when it enters the system. It is effective against free-floating bacteria. So what the birds are adding back in immediately, it's pretty good for that. But once you start to have a biofilm buildup in that system, it is really hard for chlorine to penetrate the layers of a biofilm. And then long-term use, it can be harsh on the equipment. Just a little bit more about liquid chlorine, because I want to emphasize that you've got to get that low pH in order to really have the active chlorine in the system. So what we want to look for when we're using a liquid chlorine and we're measuring its effectiveness is we're looking for free chlorine. Free chlorine is the combined measurement of hypochlorous acid and the hypochlorite ion. Both of those destroy the lipids of a bacterial cell wall. So they can both work, but the hypochlorous acid is the most effective form because of the way it is charged. It is negatively charged. It is moves into the cell wall very quickly. The hypochlorite ion is negatively charged and struggles to move into the cell wall, taking longer. It takes longer to be effective in damaging the lipids. So when you measure for free chlorine, the lower the pH, the higher the ratio of hypochlorous acid, which is the more effective form as opposed to the hypochlorite ions. So cannot see that completely. So this is just a chart of how that pH affects the chlorine ratio of the hypochlorous acid to the chloric ion. So these blue, as you get down this lower pH, as you move down into that lower pH, you can see that you've got more of this hypochlorous acid, which is the form of chlorine that is actually going to be detrimental to the bacteria quicker. And as you go up in pH, you see you're starting to see that chloric ion. That's the form of chlorine that does not pass into the cell as quickly, and so it takes longer to kill it. So lower pH when you're using liquid chlorine is very important. Gas chlorination is another choice. It's effective. It's a stable form of chlorine. It doesn't require a secondary injector because it creates its own low pH. It's got to be installed by certified technicians. Accidents with it can be very serious. And that is the hang up for gas chlorination, is that it does have to be, this is not something that is a do-it-yourselfer. You've got to have somebody that is trained in this, and that is hard to find sometimes in some locations. Gas chlorine is 100% elemental chlorine. All you have when it's combined with water is the hypochlorous acid. And so it naturally lowers the pH by making the hypochlorous acid, which is the more effective killer, more and more available to the bacteria itself. And gas chlorination is kind of a median cost range. Chlorine dioxide is another one. It is the most common when used in large municipal facilities. It's about 2.6 times more effective than the gas itself, so it's very effective. But it does require the mixture of two products. And so it's usually a sodium chloride and an acid product to produce that chlorine dioxide gas. And because of that gas, that gas creates a risk of explosion. And so it can't be transported. So it's always got to be created on site. So that can be a little bit dangerous as well. There needs to be training involved in that. It doesn't have to be somebody that's necessarily certified, but there definitely needs to be training when somebody's going to be using this. Good thing about it, it's not pH dependent. It is completely water soluble, but when it's done correctly, it can be one of the more expensive ways to treat the water. And then hydrogen peroxide, it is readily available. There are all kinds of hydrogen peroxide products on there. It is not pH dependent, so that makes it real easy to use. It can be used in conjunction with acidifiers, but it's not dependent on them. Just residual testing, it's equipment friendly. It does not damage any of the components in our water systems. Pretty environmentally friendly as well, and it's kind of in the medium cost range. And then we have acids. So acids should be used to lower pH and descale water lines. It should not be used as your sole product for cleaning water lines. During high water usage, contact time is minimal. It can take up to 20 minutes to kill a bacteria. And so that's not going to happen very easily because that water is not sitting still that long often. And if you use a lot of acid products, you're going to wind up getting fungal blooms from that low pH if you don't follow it up with some kind of water treatment. So fungus, yeast, molds, and some bacteria actually love that low pH. I mean, we kill off a huge amount of bacteria when we lower that pH, but then we create a whole nother environment in which other organisms thrive in. And then we've killed off the competition. And so a lot of times when I've got a grower that's using a lot of acid products, especially organic acid products, they will get a fungal bloom or an algae bloom in that water line from it. So I don't recommend it as a sole product for cleaning water lines. Sometimes, even when we're trying to have a water treatment program, we do more damage than good. And that is this acid issue. And so I ask people, when you're using acids, ask yourself, why am I using this acid? And that will determine the kind of acid that you're going to use. So organic acids, usually we use those for bird health. We're trying to tighten up their guts. If they've got diarrhea or flushing issues, we're trying to reduce that. But it's those organic acids that allow for the growth of yeast and molds and algae and some bacteria because it's organic. It's got that carbon component to it that allows these organisms to live off of it. So if we're going to use organic acids, we are going to use them. Just use them for a short amount of time and then come back behind them with some kind of water treatment so you don't get that bloom in the water line of something else growing. And then inorganic acid is what we would use if we were going to just continually lower pH. If you've got a pH of 8 and you're trying to get to a pH of 5.5 or 6, that's when you're going to use an inorganic acid. So ask yourself, why am I using this acid product? And that determines the kind of acid you're going to use. Both of these growers, just as an example, we're using citric acid. That is an organic acid. And like I said before, just depends on what winds up in that chicken house as to what's going to grow in your water line. And the one on the left happened to have mold floating around in the chicken house. And so when they added a lot of organic acid, the mold is what grew in that line. The one on the right, lots of bacteria. There was some yeast floating around in that house. It wound up in the water line. They used a lot of organic acids and created that mess in there using those organic acids. So my point here is, if you're going to use an organic acid, just make sure you're coming back behind it to do some water treatment, because you're feeding a whole group of organisms with that organic acid. Again, just some farms we've worked on that they were using organic acids with no water treatment behind it. And this was some of the stuff that we flushed out of the water lines. So just a few notes here. I always kind of throw this in because we don't cover it specifically, but they're kind of notes that have come up often of people asking me questions about it. Filters don't get rid of all your bacteria. They're not small enough. The microns are not small enough to get rid of the bacteria. A water softener, that is not a form of water disinfection. Yes, it reduces bacteria because you are adding some salt to it, but there's a whole nother group that actually thrive in that salt. And I'll tell you, the ones that grow in that salt are resilient little boogers. They are hard to kill. So that water softener is not a method of water disinfection. And reverse osmosis, ultraviolet light, it does clean the incoming water. They're very good at that. But then you don't have any residual that goes on into the chicken house itself or into the barn where the birds are actually adding things back to the water system. So you still need some water treatment for what the birds are going to add back to the system. Um, we talked about a lot of different kinds of chemistry there and what you can choose to do your water treatment with. But they're only going to be as effective as you allow them to be. Be informed with the kind of water treatment that you're using. Educate yourself about it. The ones that we've talked about, they all break down in sunlight, so you want to protect them from sunlight. Some are more effective at different temperatures than others, and so have some education about that. Some treatments require mixing of multiple products, and so you need some training on that. Several require a minimum contact time to be effective. So sometimes if you're going to use that, you'll use a storage tank in conjunction with that to give it that amount of time to actually treat the water. And they all require safe handling and user education. So I highly recommend that you educate yourself about the water treatment that you're going to choose. So what are you doing? What's our program? All right, here's our water program. We're going to test minerals at least, and bacteria if you're suspicious that they're causing a problem. You're going to do between flock cleaning. So if you're taking the time and the effort and the energy to do this, just follow the manufacturer's recommendations for the concentration of the product and be sure you're triggering those drinkers. And then after you've cleaned those water lines, you want a daily water treatment while animals are in the facility. So make your choice based on what you can maintain on the farm and on the ability of those that will be using it to remain safe. So think about the level of safety precautions that you want to take there on the farm in your choice of water treatment. So just a few little things after cleaning water lines when the birds are back in the facility. Treat the water regularly with a product made for water treatment. Remember, when you're putting something in the water to help the birds grow, you're also helping millions of other living creatures inside that water line also grow. And consider where your bird's going to be using its energy. Do you want it to use its energy to perform, or is it going to have to use its energy to fight what is growing in that water line and what it's ingesting from that water line? So that's the basics of thinking about a water treatment program. Thank you so much for the attention and the time here. I'm glad to answer questions if anybody's got some. And if you want to email me later, if you think about it later, there's my email if somebody wants to ask questions later.
Mary, thank you very much for your presentation. I really believe you that you can speak for hours, and that you have a lot of material. And yeah, one of our main goals here is to provide simple information and practical. So I have a question for you.
Yes, sir.
I think that in the industry, let's talk about mostly in the United States. I believe that has been a change how we understand and how we deal water. Because now we're seeing water like another nutrient. Have you been experience of seeing changes in the industry, how they approach and how they invest and how their attention is on the element of water that in the past is a big change?
I have. Like I said, probably in the water side of things, I've been doing things all together for 15 or 16 years. I
Mhm.
absolutely have seen a change in that. They do see water and feed in conjunction with each other now, and how important one is for the other. But we have a long way to go. If you go to any kind of conferences, you'll have lecture after lecture after lecture about feed additives and what the feed is doing here and what we're testing here and probiotics with this. And it's just a constant research and information that they're presenting on the different things that we add to the feed and the different ways that we change it. And
Yes.
you may have one person that talks about water. And so we got a lot more work to do with water, and we try to overcomplicate that water. That's one of my biggest pet peeves, is that we're always, oh, add this to the water and we're going to treat it this way. Just clean water. That's what you need. You just need clean water, period.
Yeah, and here is another thing that being in the industry for a few years is because when we go to a conference or we go to a lecture, I think that let's say the difficult part is putting to practice what we hear or what we learn. Because one thing is going to a show or a meeting, and then realistically, how many farms or the industry is implementing this information? What do you think? Is a big gap, is my thinking, between having the knowledge and putting the knowledge in practice. Let's say providing the birds the water, how it should be.
Well, it's complicated because we make it complicated. And so we make it so
Okay.
complicated that we don't want to start the program. There's so many different inputs of information on it is that we don't really know where to start sometimes. Because a lot of the stuff that we're listening to is sales stuff. It's sales stuff on what you want to add to the water. You know, you want to add a vitamin or an electrolyte or something like that to the water to make it do this or that. When really what we want to talk about is just how to get the water quality high in the first place. And so a lot of people don't know where to start with that. And I feel for them on that. It's confusing when you step into it. Where do I even start?
Yeah, and I think that one of the main goals of the people that is working in the industry is using a resource the best way possible to produce animal protein the cheapest and the safest, and being gentle to the environment or resource. Take care of our resource, and water is one of the major resources. So my last question is, in all the experience that you have in the academic and now in the, let's say, company world, what will be the change of mentality that the industry needs to start moving in more effective and more, let's say, efficient way in the water treatment? What the industry is missing? What mentality is missing? We're more focused on sales and making profits, or we still I don't know. What will be your thinking?
Sometimes the water issue is an issue that doesn't pay off until you're a couple of flocks in, because it takes some practice getting it down. It takes some
Oh,
effort
okay.
to get it clean. And so when the mentality changes from instant gratification, that, you know, next week I'm going to see a difference, to our investment may take a little longer to pay off. I think that would improve the way that they think about water quality. And I see some changes. Education is another one. And I think the fact that we can do things like have videos on YouTube, or have webinars, that seems to help a whole lot, because we're able to reach a lot more people in the education component of this. And I'm a firm believer that I've seen it happen. You have growers come in and you do a presentation on what could happen in their water lines, or what you have seen in those water lines, and the growers are there shaking their head. Yes, I've seen that. Yes, I've seen that. This is what you can do about it. And that education gives them the power to go back to their farm and do it themselves. So education, and knowing that when you invest in something, it may not be an instant gratification, may take a little bit to pay off. I'm hoping that changes some of the industry and the way they do it.
I'm glad that you point education one of the things that may change the industry, because I know for a fact that the way that we used to be educated 10, 15 years ago, right now has been changed completely, right?
Oh, yeah.
Maybe less people is reading papers. We're more consuming videos. We're consuming more digital information. So we need to be, let's say, a little change of mentality, how to first education, and then how to implement and be practical. That willing to wait, like you say, I really like what you say, that instant gratification or instant payback needs to come from education and knowledge. And at the end of the day, trust, right? That something can be done different.
True. Very true. Yeah. I mean, if you think about how our information gathering has changed in the last 15 to 20 years, it's really astounding the people that you can reach now that you couldn't 15 or 20 years ago. I mean, you found this research in journals. How are you going to get that out to the farm? So
Yeah.
education process has changed a lot.
Okay, so we almost covered 1 hour. So, Mary, thank you very much for your willingness, your knowledge, and your, let's say, your passion of sharing this information. And I'm very glad that we get together to do this. And my expectation is when we put this video in YouTube, the knowledge and the information uh, get through the market to the industry, and we can improve our industry. So for everybody that is listening, this is going to be open in maybe 2 weeks in our channels, and maybe Mary will also share in her platforms. And we're pushing forward, guys, trying to provide education in a practical ways, and that people can find it anywhere. So thank you, everybody, and thank you, Mary. Thank you for your participation and for your
Thank you.
wonderful information.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your attention too.
Thank you, guys. Bye bye.
Bye-bye.